The station floated between three dead stars, a place chosen because no one owned it, which made it the only ground in the galaxy that everyone agreed was safe. Every few decades, the Galactic Convergence Assembly held a ceremony called the Rite of Knowing, a tradition where newly admitted species stood before the full council and answered three questions, not to test knowledge, but to show character. The elder species had designed the questions long ago, and they had not changed since. The first question asked about origin. Where did your kind come from? What shaped your earliest memory as a people? The second asked about belief. What did your species hold above all things? The third question was the one that mattered most. The Vethkara had insisted on it 11 centuries ago, back when they had conquered their seventh neighboring world in the name of their god. And the question was simple, asked with great pride every single time. Of war. The human delegation had arrived 3 days early, which every other species present noted as unusual, and they had been quiet and polite and had brought food to share, which confused several species and delighted others. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the center podium in a plain dark uniform, no medals, no ceremonial weapons, nothing on display, which the Vethkara considered either an insult or a puzzle. She was a short woman by human standards, which made her shorter than most species in the chamber. Her hair was gray at the sides and pulled back tight. Her eyes never stopped moving, never stopped reading the room. The first two questions she answered cleanly. Earth's origin told without drama. Humanity's values described with honest complexity. Neither answer surprised anyone. Then, the Vethkara ambassador, Auroch, rose to his full height, nearly 3 meters of scaled muscle wrapped in ritual war armor, and asked the third question. In his own tongue, which the translation units carried into every language at once. Name your god of war, young species, so that we may honor the divine patron who guided your blades and blessed your battles. The chamber held 41 delegations, plus galleries packed with scholars and diplomats and observers from across the galaxy, all of them watching the small human woman at the podium. Elena did not look nervous. She looked, if anything, a little amused, which was already strange. She looked at Auroch and said, calmly and clearly, "We don't have one." The silence that followed had weight. Not the silence of nothing happening, but the silence of too many minds trying to understand the same thing at the same time. Then the chamber broke. Every delegation turned to its neighbors, speaking fast. The noise was the sound of 41 species, all confused at once. The Vethkara stood rigid. Auroch leaned forward. Civilization that has ever made war keeps a war god. It is a truth recorded in every archive, from here to the outer reaches. Are you saying your kind has never fought? Elena let the noise run out before she spoke again. She was clearly someone who had learned that rooms exhaust themselves if you give them time. No, she said, we know battle very well. We are quite good at it, actually. What we are saying is that we do not have a god to go with it. That is impossible, said Auroch. Even species that hate war have war gods. They are born from the act of fighting itself, from the collected will of those who go to battle. You cannot wage war without one forming. Elena tilted her head. We had one once. Another silence, shorter, tighter. And, she said, he wasn't good enough at the job. No one spoke, not the scholars with their tablets already opened, not the pacifist bloc who had spent centuries arguing that war gods were the root of all suffering, not the 3 species in the back rows who had only recently stopped being at war with each other, and were still deciding if they were friends. Auroch stood very still. You are saying your species killed a divine being. We stopped believing in him, Elena said, which for a god amounts to the same thing. He represented war as pure chaos, as rage with no direction, as violence that served nothing but itself. We looked at that and decided it was not useful, so we moved on. Moved on, Auroch repeated, His translation unit settled on the word disbelief. "We do not move on from gods," he said. "Gods are not tools you set down when you are finished. Gorathul has walked with us for 1100 years. He is the blade that never dulls." Elena nodded slowly. "That is interesting," she said. "Ours dulled in about 400 years. We kept sharpening the idea of war, kept asking harder questions about why we fight, and what it costs, and what it is supposed to achieve, and the God we had just could not keep up." "Could not keep up," Auroch said. His voice had gone very quiet, which his own delegation recognized as more dangerous than volume. "He wanted blood," Elena said simply. "We wanted victory. Those are not always the same thing. And eventually, we stopped pretending they were." By the time Archivist Thesavon of the Scalari Collective received her formal assignment, she had already read 6 unauthorized summaries, 3 theological emergency bulletins from different species, and 1 long dramatic essay written by a Vethkara junior priest who had apparently been crying during the session, and had written the whole thing in that state. Her assignment was simple on its surface: travel to the Human Cultural Embassy on Station Mirat 7, review their mythological and religious archives, and produce a report clarifying whether the human ambassador's statement had been literally true or some kind of cultural metaphor that had been lost in translation. Thesavon had written over 400 such reports in her career. She expected this one to be filed and forgotten within a year. She was wrong about that. The Human Cultural Embassy was a modest building on the outer ring of Mirat 7, warm inside, which Thesavon found immediately disorienting, as most species kept formal spaces cool. There were plants growing in actual soil along the walls, and the smell was green and alive in a way that her notes could not properly categorize. The human archivist assigned to assist her was a young man named Dario Cassini, tall and unhurried, with the kind of face that suggested he had heard complicated questions before and was not bothered by them. "You want to understand Ares," he said. Not a question. He had clearly been briefed. "I want to understand the claim your ambassador made," Thesavane said carefully, "that your species once had a war god and chose to discard him." Dario nodded and pulled up the first archive. "Then you start with the Greeks. They were not the first to build a war god, but they were the ones who documented the disappointment most clearly." What Thesavane saw over the next several hours was not what she had expected. She had expected reverence. Way Vethkara texts described Gorathul, golden and enormous and beloved, a god whose name was spoken before every battle and carved into every blade. What she found instead was a god who was openly mocked in his own culture's stories. Ares, the Greek god of war, was shown in their myths as loud, foolish, and graceless. He was shown losing fights, being outwitted by other gods, running from battles when things went badly. In one famous myth, he was trapped in a jar by 2 mortal men and had to be rescued by others. In another, he lost a direct judgment to Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategy, who represented a very different idea of what war could be. Your people wrote stories in which their own war god was the embarrassment, Thesavane said. Yes, Dario said, because by the time those stories were written, humans had already started to understand that blind rage was not the same thing as effective fighting. Ares represented fury without thought. Athena represented conflict with a goal, and we preferred the one with the goal. Thesavane noted this and asked him to continue. What followed was a journey through thousands of years of human religious and military history, and the pattern, once she saw it, could not be unseen. Everywhere on Earth, in every culture that had ever produced a war god, the same cycle played out. The god rose in the early period of a civilization, representing pure force. Then, as the civilization grew more complex, the god was either reformed or replaced or quietly forgotten. The Norse war god Tyr gave way to Odin, who was not just a god of battle, but of wisdom and sacrifice and strategy. The Aztec war deity required constant offerings in exchange for protection, a deal that the civilization eventually found unsustainable. Across the Pacific, across the plains, across the ancient river valleys, the same story wore different costumes. The war gods kept being outpaced. "Is not that your people became peaceful," Thesivane said slowly. "You became more demanding. The gods could not meet the new requirements." "That is one way to say it," Dario said. "Another way is that we kept asking harder questions. Why are we fighting? What are we fighting for? What happens after? Who decides when it ends?" And the gods we had built were not designed to answer those questions. They were designed to represent the act of fighting itself, not the meaning behind it. "And meaning mattered more to you than the act," Thesivane said. Dario was quiet for a moment. "It mattered more to some of us. It did not matter to others. That argument is most of our history, honestly." The message came to High Warlord Sethrek the Undying at the 3rd hour of the night cycle. It was not delivered through any communication channel. There was no signal, no messenger, no record of entry. It was simply there when he walked into the war chamber at the start of his night rounds, carved into the stone of the altar, in script that had not been used in 600 years. Gods did not send messages. Gods spoke through victories and defeats, through the outcomes of battles and the signs read in fire and blood. They did not carve notes into altars like anxious subordinates requesting a meeting. Sethrek stood before it for a long time without moving. His second-in-command, Battle Sister Keth, waited at the door in silence, understanding that whatever was happening was outside the reach of military protocol. The message said only this: "I would speak with you. Come to the high flame at dawn. Come alone." Gorathul, for 40 years, had prayed to him before every campaign, had felt the god's presence like a fire behind his ribs during battle, had never once doubted that the eternal blade was exactly what his name promised: eternal, certain, unwavering. He went to the high flame at dawn, alone as instructed, and what he found there was not the god he knew. Gorathul appeared as he always did, enormous, burning, clad in the ancient armor of the first Vethkara conqueror. But there was something different about the quality of the light around him, something Sethrek had no word for in the war tongue, and had to reach into the language of priests to name. The god looked uncertain. "I have looked across the metaphysical plane," Gorathul said, without greeting. His voice was the sound of blades being drawn from stone. "I have looked at the space where the human war deity should exist. Every species that wages war creates one. It is not a matter of belief, it is a matter of force. The collected violence of a people generates a presence in the immaterial world. I have seen it form even in species who have no concept of gods at all, wordless and nameless but real." Sethrek waited. He had learned long ago that Gorathul did not appreciate being interrupted. "There is no such presence above the human worlds," the god said. "There is a space where one should be. Vast, enormous, the shape of something that has waged more war than almost any species in the known galaxy. But that space is empty, not unfilled. Empty in the way a thing is empty when something has been inside it and is no longer." "Consumed by what?" Sethrek asked. Gorathul was quiet, in a way that gods should not be quiet. "By them," he said. "I believe the presence formed. I believe it formed many times, and each time it formed, they looked at it, measured it against what they already knew, and found it insufficient. And rather than worship it or fear it, argued with it until it had nothing left to hold on to, and dissolved back into the people who made it." Sethrek felt something cold moving through him that had nothing to do with the temperature of the chamber. "You are saying they destroyed their own war god, not once but repeatedly, by arguing with it." "Not by arguing, by surpassing it," Gorathul said. "A god survives as long as it represents something its people cannot fully contain within themselves. The moment a people fully absorb what the god stands for, the god has no more work to do. This is known, this is natural. It happens to gods of harvest, when farming becomes science, to gods of healing, when medicine becomes precise. They are not killed, they are simply outgrown. But not war gods, Sethrak said. War does not become obsolete. No, Gorathul agreed, but their understanding of war keeps growing. It grows faster than any presence can form to represent it. Every generation, they add new layers. The moral weight of it, the strategy behind it, the question of what is worth dying for, the question of what is worth killing for, the question of what comes after, and who carries the cost. Each new layer makes the war god that might have formed slightly too small for what they have become, and so it cannot hold shape. Sethrak sat down. He had not sat in the presence of Gorathul in 40 years of service. The god said nothing about it. "Are you afraid of them?" Sethrak asked. The silence before Gorathul answered was the longest of Sethrak's life. "I am a god of war," Gorathul said finally. "I do not fear. But I will tell you what I am. I am uncertain, and I have not been uncertain in 1100 years. These creatures have done something I have no record of any other species ever doing. They have made the idea of war so large, so layered with meaning, that no single divine presence can hold all of it, and so they carry it themselves. Every soldier, every general, every family that lost someone, every leader who gave the order and had to live with what came after, every poet who had to find words for it, they carry all of it, with nothing to take the weight." "And that makes them dangerous?" Sethrak asked. "That makes them," Gorathul said slowly, "something I do not have a name for. Dangerous is too simple. Dangerous is what a weapon is. A weapon does not know what it has done. These beings know exactly what they have done. They have made themselves responsible for the full weight of every war they have ever fought, with no god to bless the act or absorb the guilt. Do you understand what that means in practice?" Sethrak thought about it in the silence of the high flame chamber, then said quietly, "It means they have no one else to blame." "Yes," said Gorathul, "and a species that cannot give its guilt to a god is a species that must either break under the weight of it, or become something hard enough to carry it. One or the other. There is no third path." "Which did they become?" Sethrak asked. Gorathul looked at him with burning eyes that held for the first time in their long relationship something that Sethrak could only read as worry. "Both," the god said. "They became both. They break, and they carry it, and they break again, and they carry more. And they have been doing this for thousands of years, and they have not stopped." The testimony was classified immediately. It leaked within a week. The Vethkara priests spent the next 3 years in loud and furious argument about what it meant, and whether the fragments that had spread could be trusted. The military command spent those same 3 years very quietly updating every strategic document that mentioned humanity, not in terms of weapons or fleet strength, but in a category that one senior officer labeled simply, "Weight-bearing capacity unknown." Publicly, every species on the Galactic Council understood that something had shifted, not the humans, who had not changed at all, but the galaxy's understanding of what the humans already were. Because the question that now hung in the air above every war culture's strategy room, uninvited and impossible to ignore, was not whether humans were dangerous, it was whether anyone in the galaxy was ready to face something that had already fought itself, questioned itself, broken itself, and chosen every single time to keep going anyway. Thessavane almost missed it. She was 14 months into her research. Her reputation at the Scolari Collective had moved from celebrated to controversial, to something her department head described as a professional situation requiring review. And she was tired in a way that sleep did not fix. She had been about to close her access to the Human Cultural Archives and write the final version of her extended report, when Dario Cassini sent her one last file with a short message attached. I think you should see this before you finish. It might change the ending. The file was a collection of the oldest recoverable layers of human symbolic record. Pre-language, pre-agriculture, the kind of material that human archaeologists had spent generations carefully piecing together. Cave paintings, carved bone, the earliest known burial arrangements, things that came from before writing by tens of thousands of years. Thesivane had glanced at this material before. Briefly, as background reading, she had not looked at it with full attention. She looked at it now, and what she found made her sit very still for a long time. Across dozens of sites, from early human populations that had had no contact with each other, spread across different continents and separated by thousands of years, the same figure kept appearing. Not identical in form, because the people who made them had never met and had no shared artistic tradition, but the same in meaning, in the way that certain shapes carry certain meanings, regardless of who draws them. The figure was always shown in relation to a group, not standing above the group giving orders, not separate from it receiving worship, but inside it, facing outward, positioned between the group and whatever threat was coming. And the posture was always the same, in some essential way. Forward, but not reckless. The body language of something choosing to stand between its people and harm. Not because it was commanded to, but because it had decided to. This was not Ares. This was something far older. Something that existed before the word war had been invented. This was the figure of a protector who also happened to fight, which is a very different thing from a god who lives for fighting. Thesivane called Dario immediately. "This figure," she said without greeting. "This is the original. This is what they built first." "Yes," Dario said. He sounded like someone who had been waiting for this call for a long time. "This is not a god of war," Thesivane said. "This is a god of—" She searched for the right word and could not find one in her own language, so she reached for the closest human equivalent. "Of not letting your people die, of fighting because something needs protecting, not because fighting itself has value." "That is exactly right," Dario said. "The academic term is threshold guardian, a protector who stands at the edge." The earliest human groups seem to have built this figure naturally from the experience of survival. It is not about glory, not about conquest, not about the thrill of the fight. It is entirely about stay alive, keep them alive, make it home. "And this is the one they kept," Thesivane said, not a question. She was already seeing the shape of it. "They kept the values," Dario said. "The figure itself faded, because the values moved inside. When something becomes part of what a people fundamentally are, they stop needing to put a face on it from the outside. The thing that said protect your people became so central to how humans understood themselves that it no longer needed to stand apart and be named. It became the thing you expected from each other without being told." Thesivane sat back and looked at her screen without seeing it. She was thinking about everything she had read in the past 14 months. The codes of conduct, the laws of war, concept that even in battle certain things were absolutely forbidden. The testimonies of soldiers who had held dying enemies and felt the full, complicated weight of it. The entire enormous ongoing human argument about when violence was right and when it was wrong. An argument that had never been settled, and that humans had never stopped having in all of their recorded history. "The argument," she said slowly, "the one your species never finishes, about what war is for, when it is justified, what it costs, who is responsible for what. That is not confusion." "No," Dario said. "That is them," Thesivane said. "That is the first protector god and the later rage god, still fighting each other inside every single person. The voice that says destroy the threat, and the voice that says but is this actually the threat, and is this actually the way, and who am I protecting right now, and what does protecting them cost them? Both voices always at the same time." "Soldier that ever lived," Dario said quietly, "carried both. The one that says move forward, and the one that asks if forward is right. both at once, every time. Fesivane wrote the last section of her report in a single sitting. She did not stop for rest, which was unusual for her kind. She wrote it the way she had rarely written anything, with the feeling that the words were trying to say something true rather than build an argument. A year passed between the first session and the second, and in that year the galaxy had not been the same. Theological councils had met and argued and met again. 3 war cultures had quietly begun reviewing their foundational sacred texts with new eyes. The Scholari Collective had opened an entire new academic department dedicated to what they called human exceptionalism studies, which was a formal name for a very informal feeling. We may have significantly miscalculated this species. The Vethkara had done something that no one expected. They had asked for a second audience. Not a formal session, not a repetition of the right of knowing, but a direct diplomatic request addressed personally to Ambassador Elena Vasquez, asking that she return to the assembly floor to answer one question that had been, in the Vethkara phrasing, left unresolved at the close of the previous session. Elena had read the request 3 times, then set it down and looked out at the stars from her embassy window for a long time before she agreed to come. She arrived with the same small delegation as before. No additional security, no ceremonial display. The same plain dark uniform, the same pulled-back hair, which had more gray in it than a year ago, which several observing species noted and found quietly significant. That humans age visibly and did not seem troubled by it. The chamber was full, not just the 41 delegations, but every observation gallery packed to capacity, every seat taken. Word had spread that the Vethkara were going to do something that had no precedent, and the galaxy had shown up to watch. High Warlord Sethrek the Undying entered the chamber, and every Vethkara in attendance rose to their feet immediately. He was not a diplomatic figure, he was a military one, and his presence on the assembly floor broke 12 centuries of Vethkara tradition that kept military and diplomatic functions entirely separate from each other. He was taller than his ambassador, broader, wearing the plain working armor of active service rather than ceremony. He looked like exactly what he was, a being who had spent 40 years in real war, not in discussions about it. He crossed the floor and stopped a few steps from Elena, and looked at her the way soldiers look at each other, the direct measuring look of someone taking the full size of a thing before speaking about it. Then, apparently satisfied with whatever he found, he spoke without any diplomatic preamble. "My God told me something about your people," he said. "I will not repeat all of it. Some of it is not mine to share, and some of it would take longer than this session allows. But one part stayed with me above everything else, and I have not been able to set it down in a year of trying." Elena waited. She was patient in the way of someone who had learned that the most important things come slowly. "He said that your people carry the full weight of what war costs with no God to absorb the guilt or bless the act, that you have no divine authority telling you the fighting is righteous, and no divine comfort afterward telling you the deaths served a larger plan, that you carry all of it yourselves, every generation, and have always done so." He paused, Sethrek the Undying, who had never paused in any recorded public address. "I want to know," he said, and his voice had dropped to something quieter, something the chamber systems barely caught, "what your warriors pray to when they are walking into battle and they need something outside themselves to hold on to. What do they reach for?" The chamber had no sound in it. 41 delegations, hundreds of observers, every translation unit running, and no one made a sound. Elena stood with her hands loose at her sides and thought about the question. Actually thought about it, visibly, which was unusual for a diplomat in a formal session. She did not reach for a prepared answer, because there was no prepared answer for this. She thought about every soldier she had ever known, the ones her grandfather had spoken about, and the ones he could not. She thought about the histories she had read, the letters written the night before battles that might be the last night, the specific things people say when they are genuinely afraid and genuinely committed at the same time. Then she answered, "Each other." Sethrak waited to see if more was coming. It was. "They don't pray upward," Elena said. "They look sideways at the person standing next to them. That is the covenant. You are not fighting for glory, and you are not fighting for a god's approval. You are fighting because the person next to you is real and alive, and frightened, and trusting you. And you cannot let that be for nothing. You make a promise that is entirely horizontal, entirely between the people who showed up. It means something. Whatever it costs, make it mean something. That is the whole prayer." Sethrak was very still. "That is a heavier thing to carry than a god." "Yes," Elena said, "it is, because a god can be infinite, and gods do not come home after. The person next to you is not infinite. They are specific. They have a name. They have people who are waiting for them. They get cold. They get scared. They need you to hold the line. And that specificity is the weight. You cannot make it abstract. You cannot hand it to a divine plan. It stays with you exactly as heavy as it was, every one of them, by name, for the rest of your life. And your warriors choose to carry that," Sethrak said. "Most of them do not feel like they are choosing," Elena said, "but yes, they carry it, and they go back and carry more. Not because war is good, but because the people next to them are real, and that reality matters more than the cost of standing between it. Whatever threatens it,